Hello there, I am giving a book review today on the book The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. And what is today? Today is the 4th of April 2020, and I'm saying that to give this a bit of a time stamp. We're in the second week of quarantine, as it were, as the coronavirus gets addressed. Today we're calling it the 444, the 4th of April 2020. A huge amount of people meditating today, millions of people meditating, so that's quite exciting. I felt to do this today, while I've been doing my own meditations and things like that, I felt to do this today because this book is fantastic. It's fantastic because it really helps the vehicle and the vessel that is the human body get aligned and connected to receive and put out the wisdom of the higher self and spirit and so on that goes through it. So this is a pretty down-to-earth book, The 7 Habits. And I like my down-to-earth. I like my woo-woo too, but I like my down-to-earth because this good old 3D, this is where we live, this is where our spirit expresses into, this is where we make things happen, and this is the earth stage. And this is one of the best books I've ever come across. So I want to take you through this book. Why now? Because a lot of people I'm speaking to are looking for, purpose, direction, and I feel this book really unlocks that very, very well for people. One of the best compilations of information I've ever found that really does that. I think most people have heard of this book, have probably read it. But I wanted to do this as a reminder. It's a reminder. It's one of those books, I actually have it right here on this occasion. One of those books, you benefit, something good happens every time you pick it up. One of those books. It's got so much in it, it's a lot to try and internalize and integrate all of that information in one go. But something good always happens when you do. So, now, as for me, I discovered this book, The 7 Habits, when I was, I think I was 18 or 19. And I think I'd coming home from college, and my dad presented this book to me. And I looked at it, and I think I said thank you, but it did not feel like a compliment that I was being given it. My dad didn't really super approve of some of the ways I was living at the time, and I think he gave that book to me as a be better kind of thing. And so I put it on my shelf. I didn't really know what to do with it. I didn't know why he was really giving it to me. But it was many years later that I started to look at it and think about it and contemplate it and so on. Now I'm in my 40s and have met several people who I deeply, deeply love that teach and facilitate this work through Franklin Covey. And I even have this book here. It's going to be back to front because of how the camera is, but even got this book, which I read to my kids sometime. If we weren't stuck on quarantine, I would have had to give that back to the library, but that's the way. But I'm just trying to say it's very much nourishing me now. That's why I wanted to pass it on. Okay. So a little bit about Stephen Covey himself. He passed on in 2012. A lot of the influence on the 7 Habits came from his life growing up in the Mormon community, actually, the Church of the Latter-day Saints. A lot of that spirituality and belief system has gone into the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, which I find beautiful. He was very influenced by Peter Drucker, if you're familiar with him, and this is his words now. I understand that it's like 200 years of researching various successful and intelligent and informed people that he went back that far. It's an extremely popular book, you probably know that. It sold 25 million copies of its original version. It's not without its critics. People criticize the 7 Habits for being just plain common sense. They criticize it for being banal as well. And what did he say? He said something about that. He said, Stephen Covey said, just because it's common sense does not mean it's common practice. And I love that. That just sums it all up right there. Just because you know something doesn't mean you're doing anything with it, does it? And so I want to take you through this body of work in next 10 minutes or so. And whereas in other books I'm going to review in this way, I might be a little more subjective with it. I feel it would be a dishonor to the source material to do that. So I am going to be a little more methodical about this particular book, because it's 7. You're expecting to hear about 7 things, aren't you? So I want to balance my subjectivity with my own feelings with it, with the actual source material itself. My hope is that there'll be something in the next 10 minutes or so, a few things perhaps, that will flick your own, switch something on in you, because that's the beauty of this work. And I feel, and I'm going to speak to how I feel each of the 7 are relevant to our time and our experience and our situation now. Okay, now, right now, April 2020, now. So, before we get into the 7 habits, he's talking about paradigm shift. Paradigm shift in terms of your perspective of life and perspective of how you view things being different. Okay? Because you can see something in a certain way and then all of a sudden it's transformed. He gives a lovely example of this, and I think this was back in the 80s too, where he's on the subway, he's riding the subway, and there's a father with his kids, and his kids are just blowing up a storm, they're jumping around, screaming and so on, and the gentleman himself is just sitting very quietly with his head down like that. So Stephen Covey, after a while, he walks up to this guy and says, do you not think you should be watching your kids a little bit more? And the gentleman says, I'm sorry, yes, I probably should, but I feel I'm just going to leave them alone because their mother passed away an hour ago and they're still in shock. So of course, Stephen Covey, he totally recoils from this, apologizes, leaves the man alone and goes on. But that's one of his key kind of examples of a paradigm shift. Like, I saw it this way, but it's actually this way. So, in his research, he was coming across 2 distinctions in ethics. The dominant ethic in our society since the 20s, and that's the 1920s, has been the personality ethic, and that's the very externalized, maybe success-driven, maybe superficial, slightly manipulative way that people have been taught, and certainly more recently, in the last 100 years or so. And his preference, and I'm sure yours as well, is the character-driven ethic, which preceded that, where we're governed and taught principles like integrity and fairness and kindness and compassion, honesty, things like that. How those feed into and nurture our life. So he's very much about bringing those back into our ethic. So that's the first distinction we've got there, the distinction between the personality ethic and the character-driven ethic, okay? The next distinction we've got is the distinction between values and principles. All of the 7 habits are about principles, and he says, well, these are timeless things we've got going on here, timeless. He distinguishes a principle from a value as saying, well, a principle is more, they're similar, but values are subjective and they're internal. Principles are external and the consequences of behavior. And so he's very invested in principles because they apply 360 degrees. They apply to everyone. They're principles of law and nature, as it were, as opposed to my value might be remarkably different to yours, say, okay? So, all right, so let's get going. The first one, habit number 1, be proactive. Be proactive. I love that word. It always makes me laugh. I always think of the Simpsons, an episode of The Simpsons, when I hear that word. when someone says proactive, isn't that a word people use when they're trying to sound more intelligent than they actually are? I love it. Be proactive. But what is being communicated here? Sorry, I'm making myself laugh. What's being communicated here by be proactive? Number one is to not be reactive. When you're reactive and there's no gap between a stimulus and a reaction, you don't have freedom there. You don't have freedom there. And so part of this habit, as it were, is expanding that gap between a stimulus and a reaction, because in that you can decide and you can choose how you feel, how you act, how you respond, how you behave, and what happens. Okay, that's power. With that, and I think it was Joe Dispenza that said this, he said, and you might want to remember this one, he said, if you want to know the future, create the future. If you want to know the future, create the future. Okay, I love that, beautifully put. If you want to know the future, create the future. Like right now, let's get this a bit more relevant. No one super knows what's going to happen, do they? This is unprecedented times. Exciting, terrifying, unprecedented times. We don't know what's going to happen, so it would really behoove us all to create it, wouldn't it? To be proactive in it. Who are we waiting for? Who can we wait for? Who's doing it? Who knows what we want? Who knows what we need? Only we do. Only we do. And so this is number one, be proactive. As part of this first habit, he talks about a circle of influence. And this is a big area for either empowerment or disempowerment, okay? Because if we think our circle of influence is wider than it actually is, we're setting ourselves up for disappointment, depression, frustration, and all these things. So for me, I know my circle of influence is my 3 kids and Anna upstairs. Perhaps in some ways, on some occasions, it's through things like this. But I'm not a doctor, not one of the superheroes out there showing up in the essential businesses. I'm here at home, right? My influence is small, it's narrow at the moment, okay? And I'm good with that. It's not like I'm a president or world leader where my circle of influence would be vast. And so that's what being proactive is, accepting what our circle of influence is and doing something with that, instead of complaining about things and being frustrated or demoralized by things that we don't have direct control over. Okay? He says reactivity. Let me forgive me here. Reactivity is self-fulfilling, I think he says. Okay, so the second one is to begin with the end in mind. I'm sure you've heard this, ever since The Secret blew up, 10, 11, 12 years ago, forgetting, they all start to blur together after a while. But to begin with the end in mind, and to have an idea in mind, is a part of manifestation I'm sure you've come across dozens and dozens and dozens of times. Well, what's being conveyed here is if there's something that you want to do or something you're making happen, you're actually working on it twice. So this is conveyed in two separate ways, 2 different ways. So first of all, there's just the projects of daily life, and that might be at home for you right now, it might be at work or whatever, projects. And it's just a simply good idea to think what you want to happen before you actually do it. As they say in the building industry, measure twice, cut once, or whatever it is. On a macro level, there's the idea of, and this is the first place I ever saw this, and I've seen it many times since, of imagining what people will say at your funeral. Would you believe it? I've never done this. I must have some resistance to this. I've never done this myself. Imagining what people will say at your funeral, or what you would like them to say at your funeral. And that's really going pretty far out there to begin with, like the real end in mind. But in that context, it's bringing the internal values out to the fore, so that it's like something you can in a tactile way work with. Okay. yeah, let me see. Oh. So, yes, I'm missing an important part here. Rescripting, right? Rescripting. So if you know what you want to happen, all of a sudden you're scripting yourself to that. You're tuning yourself to that. And so if you're tuning yourself to that, you're not tuning yourself to something else, like collective consciousness, like what your dad told you should or shouldn't be or do, or whoever. You're re-scripting yourself. And so many of us in the holistic circles we travel in, we talk about shifting patterns and so on. And this is a mental body way of going through that. So if you begin with a vision in mind, it's like you can winch yourself towards that. And I know you know that, but, and I'm saying this to myself as well, how well really do we know that? If we knew it, we'd be doing it more often. If we'd integrated it, we'd be doing it more often, you know? The third one is to put first things first. First things first. Oh my God. So let me see. So we've got the quadrant there. Imagine a quadrant, and the variables on it are urgency and importance, okay? So we go from something being very urgent and very important down to being not urgent and not important. And I'm going very quickly through this. But the most important of these is the quadrant where something is it's not urgent, but it is important. Because there, again, we're out of reactivity. We're looking into planning for the future in terms of what is important to us. We're giving it time. So the art of this is not getting distracted, right there, right there. Not getting distracted. It's effectiveness, it's saying no. And some of these things are really tough for us, aren't they? And he reminds us about Pareto's law of, it's 80-20, give me a second here, sorry. We get 80% of the things done in 20% of our time. That's scary. 80% of our things we get done, we get done in 20% of our time. Oh dear. It's funny, isn't it? How relative time can be. Okay, number four is think win-win. And sometimes that's one of those things it's good just to remember, to think win-win, because, and I didn't know this until I read it, there's like 6 different paradigms of that. There's 6 different paradigms of win-win, as in win-win, win-lose, lose-win, and so on. So there's a tendency when you hear something like that, think win-win, you switch off, right? Switch off. Yeah, I know that. That's I'd like to do that. But let's turn this around for a minute and talk about losing. Some people get very competitive, don't they? Some people don't want to support other people. Some people think if I support them, then I lose. Or I can't get support from them because they lose, okay? So in this one, which is the 4th habit, he's talking about, all of a sudden here he calls it the abundance mentality. Now this is a book from the 80s. This is a book from 1989. And nowadays every book's got the word abundance in it, doesn't it? But what he's saying already there, and bear in mind, this was a book that was geared to, the business market, to the management market. I feel it's got relevance to every single person everywhere, but anyway, the abundance mentality in terms of there's enough for everyone. There's enough for everyone. There's enough of everything for everyone. And so he's saying win-win, and he ends this, or this particular section ends with talking about the character qualities of courage and authenticity. Courage and authenticity. This is a book that was originally for the business and management communities. And we're talking about courage and authenticity. Because if you go into a discussion or arrangement or a negotiation and you're not being authentic or you're not being real, it's going to be very clear immediately, isn't it? You mean clear immediately. So think win-win. Think win-win I've just lost the thought. Think win-win and everyone gains. Okay, number 5, nearly there. And this one, number 5, is actually Stephen Covey's favourite one of all, is to seek first to understand and then to be understood. To seek first to understand and then be understood. So this always makes me think of St. Francis of Assisi, and I have been watching, what's his name, Pope Francis, do his some of his telecasts from the Vatican, and I'm just shocked by the empathy and compassion that man has. Someone who is probably so far away from all of the people that he is concerned for and prays for, but they're in his words, they're in his thoughts, and people in areas of society that I don't think of, but I know about because of him. You know, a man in a tower in the Vatican. It's very humbling to watch him. Anyway, seek first to understand and then be understood. This is about listening. This is about intelligent listening. And because with a lot of people, they don't listen to someone, and they respond from their program, they respond from their paradigm, which is not giving a fair answer or a fair response to the person talking to them. It's like an automation. It's like an automation. And so what's being invited here is to listen to what someone is actually saying, to exercise empathy, and to do what it takes for someone to feel safe, and that builds trust, and that builds relationships, and that makes things happen. The second part of this, of course, is to then be understood. And it's the same thing, but it's the other way around, because if you're looking to be understood, you're looking to be understood by someone in their frame of reference. So the two parts of this is seek to understand someone's frame of reference, and then look to explain and present and convey and communicate yourself to their frame of reference, okay? He says words are 10% of what gets communicated. 10%. The other 90% of what gets communicated, this was frightening, is sound and body language. 90% of communication is not words, or yes, is not words, and that was astonishing to discover. The sixth one is synergize, and rereading this a little while ago, I was very happy because we're talking here about finding new solutions, new opportunities, and has there ever been a time where that's been more necessary? New solutions, new opportunities, new possibilities, because people talking about this new normal and this, people talking about life going back to normal, okay? Life is not going to go back to normal because the world has changed forever. I've been very relieved hearing it come into more conversations, the people talking about a new normal. No one knows what that is yet because we're not out of this at all. But a new normal. And as part of this, I'm directly quoting him here, he's talking about us as a group collectively ditching old scripts and collectively writing new ones. And I love that. All of us collectively writing a new script. I'm not sure if I should be saying this out loud, but I'm going to say it. The world that we're moving into, the paradigm of life that we're moving into, there's a lot that I hope is not in it. I really do. I really hope that my grandchildren, say, grow up in a world where there is not bullying. I hope they grow up in a world where there's more equality. And I hope that we're now in the first kind of steps and stages of that. I really do. So, the normal that we're moving into is different from one we've ever experienced. From the oldest person in the world to the youngest, we haven't experienced it. And so, with this one, talking about synergy and synergizing, we're valuing all people. We're valuing all people. I'm a musician, it's one of the things I do. And a piano keyboard or any instrument, if you took away the ability to play one note on there or even a semitone on there, you have an incomplete instrument. And so us in society, us in community, every single person is necessary, valued and vital. And we're seeing that right now. We're seeing what value the teachers are. We're seeing what value the doctors, the drivers, the clerical workers. We don't have a world without these people. And so what I'm understanding about synergy is valuing all these people, and new possibilities get created from that. Okay. And the last one, nearly there. And this is simple enough. The seventh one is sharpening the saw, and that's about self-improvement. And look, most of us have been given this time right now where we can work on ourselves, where we can give something to ourselves. To sharpen the saw, and this is a Benjamin Franklin concept, I believe he got this from largely. We're looking at supporting ourselves on the physical, the mental, the relational, I say rather than emotional, and the spiritual. To nourish ourselves in all of that, and that's how we grow gracefully. Got through that one quickly, didn't I? So there it is. I know I was a little more mental going through this one than I was with the Untethered Soul. But this is a mental work. This is about tuning us up on through the mental, through the informational, and through the cognitive. I think this book is fantastic. It's been so imitated, and one could argue it's overly simplistic, but it works. I think there's always something in there. There are many different formats that this work expresses through, okay? There's an app out there, or there's apps, I think. There's several different, look, I've got, if I've got 7 habits here, I've got living the 7 habits here, I've got a different version for children here. That's just what I've got. This is what I've got. So with something like this, where there's so much in it, it's so densely packed, if you want to get the most out of it, then listen to lectures of his. There's another book he has called The 8th Habit, which is expressing all of that in a more humanitarian context, okay? The people who he researched or interviewed, and I don't know who they were, but I want to say something about this, that he didn't say, like, I need to find a number of character ethics and habits. He didn't say that. It just kind of evolved into that. And so what you had with all these different people was 1 or 2 or 3 instinctual abilities which help them as a strong person, or dare I say leader. And so I'm saying to you now, if you even look at a summary, or anything I've said this evening about this, if you look at a summary of what these 7 habits are, some of them will be just instinctual to you. Instinctual, they're natural. And so treat a book like this as something that wakes that up in you, that switches it on. That's what I think is important to say. So yeah, the 7 habits of highly effective people. I know everyone's out meditating today. I know everyone's doing that kind of thing, and I'll do my own. I have been doing my own. There's a lot to connect in with today. But a book like that attunes, refines the human physical vessel, then that's what you have to directly work with. That's empowerment. I'm all for spirit. I'm all for spirituality, and I love that. But the more that we work on ourselves, the more we give them the more space we give them to express through us. So the spirit without the human without the spirit, both are impotent. Both together is infinite. That's what I have to say. So, well, thank you for listening. I'd love to know any thoughts you have about what I've said, or the book. I don't know what I'm going to do next week, which book I'm going to review next week. I'm vacillating between a couple of options. But I hope you have a wonderful evening. It's been lovely to have this time with you, and I'll say goodnight.